Hello, my name is Nisha Shamugaraj and I teach first year writing at Carnegie Mellon University. Today's video is brought to you by the Video Writing Tutor project, and this video specifically is going to be on writing a literature review. So hopefully by the time you finish this video, you are going to have a better idea on how to write a literature review that situates your project and builds up to your specific work that you're proposing. So you can see our agenda at the top here. I want to briefly talk about the purpose of a literature review. I then want to talk about the three moves that we want to see made in the literature review. Establishing background, trends, and then offering evaluation. And then lastly, I'll go over how you can get more help on your literature review. So first off, just starting off here, the lit review section often goes by a number of different names. It's often called related work or background. It might also be called review of research or relevant research. And sometimes the lit review is just a subsection within the introduction or just integrated into the introduction. So I'm going to be calling it a literature review. Know that it has other names as well. So before I dive into some instruction, I want you to pause your video and think for a minute, what do you think the purpose of the lit review is? Based on the papers that you've read that have a related work or a background section, what is the function of a literature review? So hopefully you paused your video, managed to do a little bit of brainstorming there. I want to offer three functions of what I see the functions of a literature review, and I want to see how yours map onto it. So this is what I want to cover today. So essentially, a literature review creates a narrative of past work to situate and distinguish your specific project. And within the lit review, we have three different moves. We want to see the relevant background information explained. We want to see the research grouped into different trends. And then lastly, we want to see the author take a stance on some of that previous work. So let's go over these one at a time. So first of all, explaining relevant background information. So imagine that this little dot is your project. This is the work that you're proposing, the innovative contribution that you are giving. It's absolutely essential to remember that your work does not occur in a vacuum. Your work emerges from all of the work that is in the field. So your work is just pushing that field one step further, and soon other work will build on your work. And because of that, we need to establish some relevant background information that's going to help us understand your work a little bit better. So for instance, maybe there is a key term that without understanding that key term or the background of that term, we wouldn't be able to understand your study because it really grows from that. Or maybe there's a specific phenomenon that a previous study has investigated, and we have the results of that phenomenon or just how a certain process works. And really without understanding that, we're not going to grasp the full significance of your project. It's just useful background. So these are things that you certainly want to do in your literature review. So talk about any background information that is relevant that we need to understand your project. Part of the value of this video is that I'm actually going to give you some language too. So here's some common language that is used in a background section, a literature review section. And again, you can pause your video at any moment here and write this down or come back to this at a later time as well. Now, I want to show you an example here, so go ahead and pause your video and look over this literature review that is doing a good job, I think, of explaining the relevant background information. So hopefully you had a chance to read this. What I like about this section is how well they explain to us what's actually going to happen in this section. So they go on and tell us this section will give you a brief description of these modern systems, and they let us know this system's presented at a pretty high level of abstraction, so you can understand, reader, the terminology and key concepts. So they kind of let us know what they're doing right here, which is in their related work section or in their background section, giving us some key terms and some key concepts that we need to understand this paper. And they offer a few citations there as well. So that is our first move that we want our literature review to do, so explain relevant background. Now the next thing we want our lit review to do is group research into trends, and this includes any agreements or disagreements. The reason we want to do this grouping into trends is to show different approaches that exist in the field, so various perspectives of the field, and also perhaps show the evolution of the field. So again, we can think of this being our field, and what this move, the grouping move, is going to do is group various authors and perspectives and studies together so you can actually start organizing this field into trends. So perhaps we want to use some language like this, so just point out a specific trend. One trend, maybe we're looking at this one, in the research focuses on X. Several studies might also emphasize Y. We could also do the work of comparing. While some researchers have investigated X, others have explored Y. Maybe we can also, if there is a smaller group here, we could say, while most previous work studies X, a small but growing body of work studies Y. So that is grouping research into trends is really a core function of the literature review, and you can see this in this really great example here. So again, I'm going to ask you to pause your video and read over these excerpts from a literature review. Now what you can see here, as this hopefully you got a chance to read over, is that these authors group their studies into trends. It's not just listing author 1, author 2, author 3, but rather we are learning trend 1, trend 2, and trend 3. And this is really, really essential for understanding the overall terrain that you're working within and for kind of dissecting the different things going on in the field. This really builds your credibility because you're showing you know what's going on in your terrain, and you're showing how your work builds on the rest of this work as well. Now, sometimes we want to go a little more than that. Maybe we want to show that there's a consensus, so an agreement in the field, and we might use language like this. Or maybe we want to show that there's disagreement in the field, that research has not really come to a consensus. And again, feel free to come back to this video at any time to borrow some of this language. So advisors often see problems with this. So here we can see some common feedback from graduate level advisors on what they're saying their students aren't doing quite correctly. So again, pause your video and take a look at this. So we see one advisor here saying, you've given me just a chronological account. I really need to see more relevant themes more clearly. And then again, this advisor says, basically, you need to make your own groupings. You need to make more connections across disciplinary boundaries. So really talking about that organizing into new trends there, creating that narrative that builds up to your project. And it's weird to think about a literature review being a narrative or a story, but it really is. You're telling a specific story about these authors have studied this, these authors have gone a different route, no one can really understand how this is working or agree, although we do agree on this. So you're telling a story about the terrain there. So lastly, so we've talked about how a literature review explains relevant background, groups research into trends. Now lastly, you want to, as an author, use your literature review to take some sort of stance on prior work. And this could mean interpreting it, just commenting on it, or outright evaluating it. So lastly, we come to our same diagram here. So perhaps we want to draw out one specific study that we want to say something that we don't think, we want to evaluate it. We don't think it's done a great job at doing something. So this study lacked measures or didn't measure this, or it had a limited gait analysis. Now it might seem like we're critiquing this study a little too heavily, so you can soften the blow a little. So you can say, while study X pioneered this specific part, it did not reach those levels of improvement with another part. So you can just point out what's kind of lacking and have some sort of interpretation there. Now this could go the other way too. Maybe you want to talk about how the study has done a very strong job at something. So Q study used a rigorous design, which we even adopt in our study. And then lastly, maybe you just want to comment on it, make some sort of observation, point out some specific detail about the study that maybe the readers wouldn't necessarily pick up on if they didn't have your commentary. So perhaps interestingly, this previous work has described all the candidates as inconsistent and therefore bad. Now, what we can see here is that all of these evaluations are very useful in helping to connect the literature review to your work. So you can use these negative, positive, or just kind of neutral evaluations and connect it back to the main story, the main character of the story, which is your work. Most of the time, that's why people are reading this literature review. And again, we come back to our same example here, and we see that not only are these authors doing a great job pointing out specific trends in the field, but they're also doing a really strong job evaluating it. So as you can see, and you can pause your video again to read this over, you can see a trend in the field and then an evaluation of this trend. So many researchers, for instance, I'm right here, many researchers use password corpora, and they explain that a little. And while this approach has many benefits, these passwords come with no contextual information. So we get some type of evaluation there. This leads really nicely to their work, which they give us at the end, because they say in this paper, we overcome many limitations of past studies. Again, advisors give similar feedback, and you can pause this and read it over. But really what we're seeing here is that advisors are saying your literature review is really just a list. I want to know where you stand. I want that sense of what's been more or less significant. Your literature review needs a higher pass, something that does more to evaluate and connect. So as a useful way to think about this, you can think of the literature review as a puzzle with the different pieces fitting together and building to your puzzle piece, rather than just a pile of things or a data dump of this author, this author, this author, this author, with no coherent organization or narrative there. One last note I'll leave you with is that meta commentary, or commenting about your commentary, writing about your writing, can be very useful in setting up a literature review. So for instance, I might say something like, in this section I will discuss past and current applications of this theory, so I can help you understand the function of this literature review. Now, this has been a very brief treatment of a very complicated genre with lots of different moves. So what I would suggest, if you want to talk about this more or see how these moves apply to your own literature review, make a free GCC appointment and work with one of our trained consultants on improving your literature review. I hope this video was helpful. Good luck writing your lit review.